Reflections with theologian Father James Bacik, lecturer and campus minister at the University of Toledo.
As I look at this from the management side of things, I'm sure that one of the problems is the sense that management will lose its prerogatives. In other words, management says, well, I worked hard to get here. You know, maybe I rose up from the assembly line and I'm now a supervisor. And I should be telling other people what to do now. And if I begin to share all my power, then I lose my status and my whole prestige. The whole system is built on the idea that I've risen up above and now can begin to tell other people what to do.
Today on Reflections, Father Bacik talks with Professor Thomas Klein, who is Associate Dean of the College of Business Administration and Professor of Marketing at the University of Toledo. Father Bacik and Professor Klein will discuss labor management relations, perspective, and program. And now, here is Father Bacik.
Tom, you and I have talked often about labor management relations. The catalyst for our discussion has been the Bishop's economics pastoral, which is entitled Economic Justice for All, Catholic Social Teaching in the U.S. Economy. I presume that that's one of the things that the bishops wanted to happen in writing this document. They were hoping that people would get together and discuss the moral dimension of the economic structures in our own society. Here I am sort of representing the Catholic community, and you representing the academic community, being involved in teaching and so on, the marketing field, and here we are talking about serious matters connected with the economy and trying to uncover the moral questions involved and bring a moral dimension to the whole policy debate. So I think the bishops would be happy that we're talking along this line, and one of the things that I find happening is that as we go into any particular aspect of the whole letter, we keep deepening the thing. It seems like new questions keep arising. So you and I have spent a lot of time talking about the cooperation called for between labor and management. And even though we've spoken a good deal about it, I find that there seems to me at least to be more to be said. And so I'd like to take up that question again, revisiting that question with the publication of the final draft of the bishop's document in November of 1986, and to see what else we might uncover about it. And I'm interested, I think, in talking about it in very concrete terms so we can get a feel for what management is thinking about it and what labor is thinking about it. So I wonder if we could begin a little of that by looking at the management side of this. I'm going to try to put a little structure into this discussion and maybe begin by thinking about management, how they view the cooperative effort, how they've traditionally viewed it, and maybe a lot of the current literature on excellence that we get available today. And then after we look at that, maybe we can look at the labor side of it, their fears and expectations about greater cooperation. How does that sound as a sort of outline for what we want to do here?
Sounds good.
So why don't you start by saying something about the management side of things and what they are about and their concerns, what they have to think about, obligations to shareholders, and all that kind of thing.
Well, you provide a good pickoff spot in the sense that management traditionally views itself in a fiduciary relationship to its shareholders, and so it, at least in theory, manages the company in order to protect the interests of the owners of the company. Within that framework, labor is viewed as a means of getting the job done. It's viewed as a cost to be controlled, and those two perceptions don't lead to much in the way of cooperation, particularly in large companies where there's a good deal of physical and time distance between the positions taken by management and the people who are part of the bargaining units.
Tom, if you begin to think in those terms, certain problems arise, don't they? I mean, you might get, for example, management deciding to move a whole operation, to move their plant to someplace else without giving much thought to the plight of the workers left behind, or without thinking of the contribution these workers have made over many years to the building up of this industry, to the supplying of capital for new investment, and so on. So you get plant closings with very little humane consideration when you work only out of the perspective that you just described. And I think a lot of other bad things happen too. I mean, workers end up feeling as though they're cogs in the machine, that they are disposable parts. They end up being unhappy with their jobs. You read these stories now and then of workers sabotaging the whole assembly line because they're bored or upset or feel used as an object. That would be a second kind of bad thing that would happen from that outlook that you've described for us. And I'm sure we could find a lot of other bad consequences. True?
Yes, and you've identified a couple of the more dramatic examples of how that works. Let me add another aspect to this, and that is traditionally management, labor, collective bargaining agreements and so forth have been struck with a great degree of concern for what are called management prerogatives. Management as the representative of the share owners or the owners feel that they have rights to control the workplace, and the workers, of course, don't share in that at all. Whenever the right is put on the management side, the natural equation shows up with an obligation on the worker side.
It almost sounds like a Marxist critique to me, the thing that Karl Marx said, that the workers were simply part of the commodities. They were simply used. They were tools like machines in the hands of labor. I guess we often talk about that as unbridled capitalism, or the early stages of laissez-faire capitalism, which often ended up in child labor and women laboring long hours and people working for below standard wages and so on. I suppose what we would say is that capitalism and this free market system, the managerial side of it, has gone through stages of development, wouldn't we? I mean, that is a thing of the past in its crude form, at least. And we have labor laws now, and laws against child labor and so on, and all of minimum wages needing to be paid. So there's a lot of humane legislation that's come into the mix that have sort of keeps a cap on this unbridled capitalism that you might be describing here.
Yeah, I think certainly we have, through law and through the growing power of unions over the past 80 years, leavened a lot of those kinds of problems. But I think you also have to recognize that it's a new situation that we're dealing with today. You look at a factory operation of maybe 50 years ago, and you saw a great deal more craft shop kind of work setting, whereas the assembly line model that we tend to look at most often, we really look at a factory and we see a machine, a whole machine of which certain people doing certain tasks represent little more than part of that machine. Within that kind of a context, the workers themselves are interchangeable. They perform very highly specified kinds of activities, and it's very easy to dehumanize them from the perspective of management. What's missing, of course, is the extent to which those human cogs, if you will, are able to and want to contribute more to the total product of that factory system.
Tom, there'd be a lot of managers who would say what you're describing is a straw man. You know, it's not like that anymore. In our corporation, we never treat people like that. We have opportunities for training and for growth and development. I think of the corporations that periodically ask me to come in and give time management talks to their people. They do so on the premise that I'm going to be talking about the quality of their family life, the importance of leisure and so on, and telling their workers here that it's important for you people to take care of your personal needs and so on. And industry does that, of course. The management encourages this kind of thing because they know in the long run it will be in their best interest, that if the workers are happier, that things will go better. So there is a definite new, I think, enlightened period that we find management in. We find a lot of my friends are in the management era aspect of the business world, and I know the way they talk about their employees and the workers, the people in the plants and so on, it has a much more humane sound to it. They try to think of them as having dignity and worth, and they try to bring them into the process, and they want to treat them like human beings and so on. So I think it seems like we're in still of a new phase here of the way the managerial section operates. I don't say that's totally across the board, but I certainly detect movement in that direction.
Well, there's phase one and there's phase two, and you'll find examples of companies at every level. Phase one has been with us for a couple of centuries, to the extent that we had a paternal model within companies. That paternal model did care about the personal life, the recreational outlets, the family health, and so forth of the worker. But all that really was apart from the work situation. The work was a dirty job to be done, and what you wanted to do is keep people happy doing that dirty job. The phase two model that's emerging more recently, that, as I say, it's been with us in a small way for as long as there were companies that had humane bosses and workers that were known and were seen as people and so forth. But what you're seeing now is in even the very large corporations an attempt to humanize the perception of the worker or workers on the part of management. That's where we get into the participation model, where we actually take that humanity understanding and go beyond concern with the bowling league and the softball team and whether or not people have adequate vacations and things like that, and go right into the workplace and say to Joe and Charlie and Sarah that you're in this situation, you have work to do, you know your job, let us work together. Why don't you all work together and try and find better ways to do it? Ways that would improve quality, ways that would improve the total productivity of the plant or the department or the production unit.
So this is moving away from a paternalism where you treat the workers as children and give them these nice perks on the side, but still expect them to operate in sort of a slavish way in the plant. Now what you're saying is the new phase we're in is more democratic and more participative. Now we're dealing with workers as human beings, and we're saying you've got intelligence, you've got ideas, you've got practical wisdom about how this plant could work better, and we want to hear it. We often talk about that as quality of work life. And the building up of these various units of discussion groups and so on, where the workers can come together and look at the operation and say and make their suggestions on how it could be done better. So in this phase, we're seeing real participation and real democratic kind of procedures, the kind of things that appeal to us, I think, as Americans, and fit in a lot with what the Catholic bishops are calling for in their new partnership, as they say, which is for the public good, partnership between labor and management.
Well, I think it's much more reflective of the American, if you want to call it that, the American psyche, the American view of people within the work situation. It's a very practical one. It says that you people have something to contribute to you have a vested interest in the job and in the company, and you have something to contribute to making that company work better. And this is going to happen to the extent that you can participate constructively in management decisions. It's going to happen to the extent that you participate in the fruits of the company's efforts. It means that, being realistic about it, that you share in the threats that the company faces, but you also share in the opportunities that we're able to capitalize on with your efforts. It's not so much a flat-out democratic model. I think that begs a lot of formalization that may or may not actually exist. It does mean that management has to make a major act of faith, really believe in the ability of the workers to participate, because there have been, of course, a lot of what I would call sham or paper efforts at developing worker participation. We're really talking about a new way of organizing certain kinds of companies with certain kinds of industrial processes that we traditionally haven't done before. The assembly line model, its automation over the past however long automation has been with us, 20, 30 years to a degree certainly, by and large has been to reduce the human component of the equation. the new thinking, if you want to call it that, which really isn't all that new, except that the crisis that we've been talking about over the past 10 years or so, certainly in this part of the world, makes us wake up, shakes us up a little bit.
When you say crisis, Tom, you're talking about the international economic crisis, the fact that we have not been very competitive in the world market, that we've lost a share of the world market, that the Japanese, for instance, are often doing things better than we are, creating better quality products and so on. All of that has helped create this economic crisis, and that has been a factor that's fueled this desire to find a new mode of operating, in this case a more cooperative one.
Well, I think companies have shifted their attention, not completely certainly, but to a large extent have shifted their attention from, is there a machine that we can buy that'll do this job better, more uniformly, quicker, or whatever, to the people element in the equation, to the people, essentially saying that the most important asset of the organization is its people.
Tom, that fits in perfectly with what the bishop's economics pastoral is all about. They keep saying any economic system must be judged in the light of what it does for people and to people and with people. It's a very personalist document in that sense. It wants human beings to be at the center of our decision-making about economic matters. And I suppose that's one of the reasons they call for new structures in this whole business of cooperation. They feel that we must begin to institutionalize in a way this importance and dignity and worth of each individual, so that the worker, as Pope John Paul II has kept insisting, is at the center of all economic understanding, that the worker has this dignity and worth. The worker helps produce the capital. We wouldn't have capital without workers' sweat of their brow, so that brings them to the fore and really brings this moral dimension to the whole question.
Yeah, and the nice thing about this discussion, I think, is that it focuses on the company, the firm, which is the key unit in the economy, as opposed to the people focus, where most of the discussion on the bishop's letter has been, that I've at least participated in, has largely been at the macro level. We're concerned about welfare laws, and we're concerned about poverty, and we think of these institutional mechanisms primarily as being governmental in character, changing regulations, changing public policy to put more focus on people. Well, looking at it from the perspective of someone who works in a business school, while I recognize the public policy dimension of this as being very important, I think it's more important for me, and perhaps for most of us where we work and live, to look at how that works its way out in the companies where we spend most of our lives, the companies where we do our jobs, the companies where we probably do our major contribution.
Tom, I think that as I look at this from the management side of things, I'm sure that one of the problems is the sense that management will lose its prerogatives. In other words, management says, well, I worked hard to get here. Maybe I rose up from the assembly line and I'm now a supervisor, and I should be telling other people what to do now. And if I begin to share all my power, then I lose my status and my whole prestige. The whole system is built on the idea that I've risen up above and now can begin to tell other people what to do. I think that in management there is a great resistance to move to this more participatory model. It's sort of built in. There was an adversarial relationship, and now I'm on this side of the equation, and by golly, I'm going to have a say in how this whole thing runs. I think that there's a lot of education that would need to be done on the part for managers to be able to function effectively in this model. Some people will feel threatened just by sitting down in a discussion group and saying, well, how could we do this job better? Or shall we rearrange the assembly line? Or how can we keep this plant under better maintenance and so on? That becomes very threatening to some people. Their very personality structure says, no, we need an authoritarian structure. We have to say definitely how this is all going to be done. So I would guess out of that, I believe that analysis is correct, we would need to say we need education for managers. We need to help managers find new ways to relate to the workers.
The real problem has been, at least in the case histories that I'm familiar with, the real problem has been at the middle management level. People rise into management positions to a large extent, as you say, because they have personalities that prompt them to want to have control. They feel confident in their ability to solve problems and deal with inferiors, get them motivated and so forth. But they largely see themselves as bosses, and people who don't see themselves as bosses generally don't aspire to be managers and thus don't become managers. The top management looks at the system in a very different kind of way, I think, in general, and they don't have quite as many of these hang-ups. What you find some companies doing is literally removing layers of management and saying, hey, we've got 18 people in this department who ought to be able to schedule their own work and control the quality of their own work and things like that, and we don't need some straw boss standing in there telling them what to do and telling them what not to do. That is a waste of money by itself, and obviously to the extent that that person functions in that way, creates an environment in which the worker doesn't feel any obligation to participate in quality control or self-direction and so forth. You take that layer of management away and you wind up with 18 people who now feel compelled to contribute both in terms of their own work and perhaps more likely together. And the new model replaces that middle manager, that first-line supervisor, with a facilitator, coordinator type person who really is a different kind of animal than
and
we're
I
talking
think
about.
that this, of course, causes great problems and would be one of the fears that managers are going to lose their jobs. Tom, I want to make sure we save a little bit of time here to talk about the union side of this, the labor side of it all. I've been impressed by a talk that was given by a Glenn Watts, the president of Communications Workers of America. He had a lot to do with trying to get labor management approaches at work with AT&T. And he talks a lot about the mistakes that management made and the sort of programs that they put forward, which were more or less a sham. That all that the management they said, well, we want to have more participation and so on, but all they were really interested in was improving productivity and getting the workers to work harder, and they didn't really care about the workers, and they didn't really want their ideas and input. It was just a gimmick in order to accomplish something, and he says that labor has to be very worried about that and keep on guard against these tricks used by management, as he says, to simply increase productivity. But he distinguishes those gimmicky kind of programs from the really solid kind of things that they tried to put into practice with AT&T. And he talks about, since 1980, working with the Bell system to create these joint quality of work-life programs. And they did a lot of education, and they tried to prepare management and labor for all of this. And he came up with 5 key points that he thought would help this whole thing to work. In fact, they had a committee that worked out what they called a statement of principles to govern this whole effort. And I want to go through these 5, and then maybe we can go back and talk about them a little bit. He says, first of all, the effort is joint. The union is involved as an equal partner from planning through implementation, not just as a junior partner in all of this. Then he says the whole program of this involvement, of this participation in improving the quality of the work site and so on, must be voluntary for the union, the company, and each individual worker. That not everyone wants to be in it, and therefore it has to remain voluntary. Third one, he says, collective bargaining and the grievance process are off limits for these quality of work-life programs. Worker participation is a separate process. In other words, that's what labor is always worried about, that this will get into the collective bargaining process, that will prevent them from adopting this adversarial relationship with management at some point when it comes to say, how much are we going to pay these workers? The fourth one, he says, is no one can be laid off or downgraded as a result of ideas which come from the participation process. Now, that goes back to what you're saying. That would include those middle managers. So if you really got into this thing at AT&T the way they tried to work it out, that you couldn't get laid off or fired because someone came up with a new idea and a better way of running this whole operation. And fifth, he says, the goals of the process include both human satisfaction and economic efficiency. And the emphasis, of course, for the union people would be on that human satisfaction side of it. They're trying to help the workers to feel better, to feel more fulfilled in what they are all about. And as it strikes me again to complete my point here, that one of the things the bishops say in number 304 of their document here in the 4th chapter on this cooperative model is that the labor unions have a bigger job to do than just try to get their workers more money. That they have a role to play in improving the quality of the work site, of being more participatory, of helping the company to function better. And I think this whole quality of work-life program that I've been describing here really seems to fit into that whole model.
Well, union leadership has been in a very sensitive